On April 17th, I was giving a lecture in carbon management and circular economy for the students that are participating in the Urban Shift project. My name is Werner Kössler. I'm a senior consultant for sustainability management. I'm working within this field of consultancy now since more than 30 years. And when I'm not advising companies in sustainability matters, as you can see, I like to be out in nature, and this is also one reason why I'm focusing on environmental issues to keep nature in its beauty. The content of the lecture was split up in two important topics. I started with the carbon management, and I was introducing to the students the most important facts that are needed to understand the urgency of carbon reduction measures. So, for example, this slide illustrates the carbon emission reduction path we need to follow not to exceed certain temperature limits due to an overconcentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. Next, I introduced the standards based on which a carbon accounting is properly done. This graph illustrates the different scopes of emissions, and this is important for the students to know that there are 3 scopes and that a full carbon emission accounting is considering the direct emissions and the indirect emissions alike. Another important fact they need to know is that in almost all industries the carbon footprint is dominated by the scope 3 emissions. They outweigh the scope 1 and 2 emissions combined in most cases by 8 to 10 times. Next, I was introducing how such carbon footprint calculations are done, so that you have different types of calculators. And for an example, I was using the calculator that is hosted from the Austrian Environmental Agency. With this calculator, it's possible to do the math on scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. So for example, you enter the amount of fuel that is consumed and of electricity that is used in a certain period, normally 1 year, and automatically this tool calculates the result of your scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. Next, I asked the students to apply what they have heard on their own projects, and we have had an interesting discussion on the results. The second part of my lecture was about circular economy. Also here, I gave an introduction in the urgency why we need to think more circular. This slide is highlighting 2 figures. One, this 8.6% of circularity, and the other that in that sense 92% of all extracted materials are still used in a linear way. Then I introduced the so-called value hill model, which is highlighting the stages on which circular measures can be applied. And thirdly, I introduced a model that could then further be used for assessing the students' projects. This model is the so-called 10R model, which defines 10 strategies on circularity, and this enables you to assess on every stage of your value chain if there are measures possible, and if so, what those measures could look like. So for example, the 4th category, repair, can be applied on the product itself, so that, for example, in future, as a company, you offer a repair service to keep your products in function over a longer period of time. And finally, also for the circular economy, I asked the students to assess their projects accordingly using this 10R model and then presenting their initial results to have a discussion on the results. The feedback of the students was overall very much positive, and I'm looking forward to give these kinds of lectures for the next and final round of Urban Shift participants.